Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. Today we have something a bit different. We have Natasha Kennedy. Natasha Kennedy is an entrepreneur who has been on the scene in Madrid among language teachers and educational type people for quite a long time. I recently heard her on another podcast and thought it would be cool to get her on this one. Natasha Kennedy is the co-founder and CEO of the BLC Group, an education company based in Madrid that includes a Spanish language school, a TEFL training center that is for teachers of English as a foreign language, and a satellite university. She's passionate about creating real opportunities for international students in Spain and has been building innovative education projects for over 2 decades. Natasha brings a down-to-earth, straight-talking approach to everything she does. You'll see that down-to-earth, straight-talking approach here on this episode. We talk about a lot of things. We talk about learning Spanish in order to integrate into Spain. We talk about the English teaching industry and, sort of how it's been going over the last couple of decades. I came to Spain as an English teacher 20 years ago, and Natasha has also been doing things like that. Natasha came to Spain in 2001, I think she said, and was also teaching English. So we've got a lot of shared history there. Other things we talk about include the glam gloss that Instagram might give to life abroad and how people may arrive in Spain with expectations that are a bit detached from reality. It's okay, we've all been there. We're also going to talk a little bit about Natasha's new university project. It's a satellite university that teaches business and marketing skills, also the Spanish language, trying to create people who will be able to be business professionals here in Spain without any obstacle from not having learned the language. So I hope you enjoy this one. Please leave a comment below and like and subscribe. Let's go. Natasha, welcome on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
How are you doing today?
The sun is shining. I'm in North Wales at the moment and we don't get a lot of sunshine, so I'm very happy.
And you're indoors doing this. Okay.
I am.
Well, hopefully it'll be an interesting episode. I've known about you for a long time because of TT Madrid. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But first, why do you love Spain?
I think when I came to Spain, sorry, you might get a few of my dogs in the background. I hope it's not going to be too distracting. I think
That's
the
fine.
policeman just might have turned up. So Spain for me is just, there's something for everyone. It has seasons, which I absolutely love, but I hate dark and I hate miserable rain, and it's one of the things I've most struggled with spending time in North Wales. So it's got a brightness and lightness, and it makes me feel joyous. Spain, yes. Madrid, more so. I don't think you can love Barcelona and Madrid. I think you have to make a choice on those two things. It's like Real Madrid and Atletico, you've got to make a choice. I love visiting Barcelona. I love the whole of Spain. I got married down on the coast in La Dora. And for me, what Spain's given me is opportunities that I don't think I would have had if I'd have stayed in the UK. I think I'd have stayed in my boring corporate job, because what else? And so it has just opened up a whole new world for me and allowed me to meet people from all over the world. I think I've got so much more depth to my understanding of world, of politics, of empathy, of all those things. So for me, it's just been, I did most of my growing up. I arrived when I was in late 20s, and I've done most of my formative stuff in Spain. Mortgages, babies, marriage, all of the big things.
Yeah. I find it interesting that you suggest that Spain gave you opportunities you wouldn't have had otherwise, because, we don't usually think of Spain as a land of opportunity per se.
Yeah.
But I would say the same thing, that I got out of, Arizona and I came to Madrid, and I was like, yeah, I was presented with a series of opportunities I would not have had if I had stayed in Arizona.
I think
which
it
is,
makes you think differently, and that could be maybe just being abroad, being in another country,
I
and it
think
could have.
it could be that, or just like the immigrant lifestyle that makes you, you know, espabilarte, as they
And
say.
scrappy. It makes you
Yeah.
scrappy because you've got to make your own opportunities come. But I
Yes.
think Spain also was at such a stage. I mean, what date? When did you come? What year?
2004.
Okay, so I was 2001. So a very similar time. Like we've seen it go from virtually no foreign food. I can remember getting, my first pizza and it was made with cheddar cheese and it virtually fell out of the box. To, a smorgasbord of cuisine from all around the world. So we've seen this evolution. I can remember going, because I used to go to the gym at 5:30 in the morning. Of course I did. I worked in London. Like, when else would you go to the gym? And
I
me
know.
going to find a gym in Madrid, and the only one was in the Holiday Inn.
Oh
Um,
yeah, the one in Nuevos Ministerios.
Helios. And so I went and I said, what time do you open? And he said 11:30, and I was like,
Wow.
but I want to go before work. And he was like, why? And I was like,
Hey.
yeah, why? Why do I want to do this? And I think it took me such a while to kind of change my chip, coming from London, working in law, that intensity to Madrid, to Spain, and it really made me evaluate life in a very different way. And I think that is very Spain.
Yeah. Well, you've kind of gotten into this a little bit, but could you tell us a little bit about your Spanish origin story?
So I met a man on a beach in Abu Dhabi.
Abu Dhabi, yeah. All right. I've been to
So
the beach in
I was
Abu
on
Dhabi.
I was on holiday. He was working there. I don't think he quite got the concept of a holiday fling. So 25 years later, here we are. And his next job was Madrid. So he came to Madrid, and I was in London. So we did the back and forth for 6 years. And then I was I was 28, coming up 30, wondering where this was going, and thought, I'm going to go. And so I went to live in Madrid and didn't speak Spanish, had some basics, but had tried learning at the local international house in London, and it had been a disaster, and I had a real mental block that I wasn't good at languages. I think a lot of us have that kind of story from if you've had, not the best teachers, and certainly in the UK, languages isn't a great thing. And so I came, and what does a girl do when she doesn't speak Spanish? She teaches English.
Of course.
And never thought it would become a thing. And then married beach man, and yeah, we've been together just over 25 years and have a son, Jack, who grew up obviously in Spain, is bilingual, which is a great gift to give any child.
Yeah.
You don't have to sit in a Spanish class.
Cool. So you came to Madrid in 2001
Yeah.
and you were teaching English, but I knew about you from TT Madrid, which I don't know, people started talking a lot about TT Madrid around 2015 maybe.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know when it started, but it got on
I
my
started
radar.
in 2006. So end of 2000, October 2005, and with our first course in 2006. And it really, pretty much halfway through my TEFL course, so I did my TEFL course in Madrid, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So back in London, I'd made the transition from law to law and human resources. So I was doing my master's in training and development, and the training side of HR was really the area that I was most interested in. So I was already doing my master's, doing a lot of training, etc. And as soon as I started teaching, I was doing a lot of training as well as the teaching. So I was, doing presentation skills in English. Well, that includes both, the English component and the training element of it. And when I did my TEFL, it was an okay course. It was slightly odd, but it was an okay course. But there was no pastoral care, and I was fine. I had my boyfriend. He had his flat. He had a job. It didn't matter how long it took me to get a job. I was very set up. His company did all my bureaucracy. They organised my NIE. I had such an easy ride of it.
Yeah.
And then I saw these 12 other people who were flailing around. And it was very much a course of, you got your certificate and you were like, and they were like, yeah, thanks very much. Bye. And so I knew pretty much then that I wanted to set up my own TEFL. I did it with a partner. That first partnership didn't work out. He had other commitments, etc., etc., and didn't really get involved. And so it was me, and yeah. And so set off my first course. Still in contact with Tag, who did the first. He was the first person to ever sign up. He's now a European parliamentary politician and got a wife and a baby.
All right.
And that's how it happened.
TEFL, in case anybody is unaware, is Teacher of English as a Foreign Language. A lot of people kind of come to Spain doing something along those lines. I showed up in 2004, and I guess November 2004, or yeah, mid-November to mid-December 2004, I did a TEFL course at the BLC, which interestingly is not your BLC,
It's
the
not.
British Language Center in Plaza Castilla, which is not there anymore.
No.
But I got the impression it had been around since the 80s or something, and it was just this, flock of older British people who were hanging around teaching English and giving TEFL. And yeah, those were different times.
It was very, very different. The need, I think you'll know, back then there was just not enough people in comparison with the amount of jobs you could. I can remember getting off my TEFL and going yes to everything, and then just going, and the phone just not stop ringing. And
Yeah.
I realised I could have been super picky, and I don't think that is the same. The rates were much in comparison. Although everything had gone up because obviously we'd transferred to the euro in 2000, so I'd seen the prices go up considerably. Our apartment, we lived in Príncipe Pío, where people were still thinking that we lived in the countryside living in Príncipe Pío. It was seen as like the absolute outskirts. The commercial centre hadn't been built.
Oh yeah, before that
It had,
mall
yeah,
kind
all
of put it
before
on the
that.
map. Yeah.
It was all before that. We used to go to Casamigos for our chicken on a Sunday morning, and it was €550 for our 2-bed apartment, swimming pool, gated community,
Ooh.
the whole works.
Yeah.
And people were like, "Oh my God, you've been ripped off. That is such an awful amount to pay." And
Yeah.
when you compare that now to, which is one of the things I think is more challenging about Madrid and Spain in general, is obviously the wages haven't kept up with the house prices.
Yeah. The experience I had is that I was able to just kind of take my TEFL certificate and go out and earn €1,200 a month or something. Which was not all year long. It was, sometimes it was up to €1,500 in a really good month, and in summer it was zero. But it was still, fairly steady and predictable and a respectable level of income. And I think the level of income has not changed, but the price of everything has doubled
Absolutely. I
in the
mean, you can look at
meantime.
the auxiliares. I was here obviously because that started in 2001. I think it was the year that I came, 2004. I can't remember when the auxiliar program. So language people going who are not qualified, but have to be graduates who then go into schools and teach. I know but and it was €1,000. 16 hours. They were absolutely living their best lives because, at the time, €1,000, you were paying €300 for your apartment, your room in an apartment. Beers were super cheap. The metro is still, I think, incredibly cheap in comparison with, especially London. And it was, there was, you could pick up private work in the evening. So,
Yeah.
and nothing, and that I think is the big issue, that the salaries for the teaching English market haven't changed.
Yeah, some people were suggesting that they might go up because with Brexit there's a smaller supply of British people coming in, but I haven't seen any indication that salaries are improving.
I think I think if it hadn't been for COVID, I think that might have absolutely been the case. So in terms of our market, we got hit by Brexit terribly. So we used to have, say we had 100 students a year, we'd normally have maybe 200 students, but let's say 100. So 70 of those would be people who didn't need visas, so European, maybe 10% on a good year. Most of them would be from the UK, and the rest would mainly be Americans. We hardly get any Canadians. I don't know whether Canada's so amazing no one wants to leave, or they go to more French-speaking countries. I don't know, but obviously for us, Americans is a big market for us. And Brexit stopped that because we were dealing with a generation of people who weren't used to paying, who didn't even know how to do a visa, had never had to do visas, and weren't used to paying that kind of prices that you would then need for a course that is for a whole year. So people went from being able to come for a full week TEFL to having to pay for a program that covers the whole year. Whereas for the Americans, they're like, oh my God, that's so cheap, fantastic, yes, where
Yeah,
do I sign up? So Brits just went boom.
yeah,
Um,
of course.
and so I think if COVID hadn't happened and the whole English teaching world would have got completely disrupted, then I think that would have been the case because there was absolutely not enough. There was hardly any Brits coming through, and
Yeah.
most of the other TEFL schools had gone by that point. So there was just us and a couple of others. There's basically two and a half of us left. And when I came into the market, there was 12 TEFL schools, so it really was boomtown.
Wow.
So I think that would have been the case. But then COVID happened really quickly after that, and then disrupted everything.
Everybody moved online. One guy I know who actually is trying to hire and organize English teachers says that it's pretty tough to get people to actually go out to some polygono at 8 in the morning
Yeah,
anymore.
I'm interested.
This is what this is what I did back in
We
the
all
day because
did.
we didn't have the let me just sit at home option. We had you're going to talk to the vice president of some company in the industrial park, 45 minutes outside town.
Exactly. I mean, are you even an English teacher if you haven't schlepped up the side of a motorway with
Yeah.
no barrier because no bus goes up there in order to get to your 8 in the morning class? Absolutely.
Yeah, those were, I wouldn't really, wish that on people, but, it's a growth experience, I guess.
Absolutely. But they don't, I mean, our grads still get plenty of work. I think the reason we're successful is because there's hardly any people coming to do it anymore in terms of, there are not many, there's not the competition. So it's not like it was back then. So there's still plenty of work. But they can be choosy because they can get pretty much a full set of classes online and off they go.
Yeah. So, I mean, my next question was whether you think teaching English is still a career option for people and
I
people
don't
are
think
still
for
doing it.
many people it was ever really a career.
Well,
I think
career,
it's,
yeah, okay, career meaning,
but it
yeah,
has been for me and it has been for you.
sort of.
And the people who create, academies and things like that. So I think there's some people who make a career out of it, but I don't think it's the norm. I'd say 95% use teaching English as a means of being in Madrid, earning money, and I think it gives you so many transferable skills for the future. And I've seen, so, I'm in contact with so many of my grads, all of whom, are growing up now, having children, families, so many of them have stayed or gone into education off the back of it. So they may not have stayed as English teachers, but being in education fired up something and they've gone back and got qualified as teachers or become special needs, whatever their particular scenario is, or worked as admissions and that kind of thing. So I think it sparked a love of maybe the kind of more educational sector. But I think actually making a career out of teaching English is not that easy unless you have an entrepreneurial spirit, unless you're willing to set something up and innovate and go out there and do something new.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but my path is obviously very different than yours because I'm not qualified to, even to push a broom around if we're going to be, honest about it. But I just kind of came and overstayed my tourist visa, and then I was working in academies. And at some point, I decided, like, this sucks. I'm going to do private classes and, cut out the middleman and try to charge more. And what I quickly discovered is that I was kind of running a business,
Yeah,
which I had never
absolutely.
considered myself to be that kind of person, but I had to, change my way of thinking about it from employee mentality to entrepreneurial mentality. And what I quickly decided there is that even if I could charge, 35 euros an hour, my life was still going to suck because I had to, find all of those people to pay me 35 euros an hour and then go to see them in their office. And it was just not, you know, sustainable and was not getting me to the places I want to go.
Absolutely.
So when
It's
I,
a hustle. It's a
huh?
constant. It's a constant hustle.
Yeah. And so when I talk to people online, a lot of times they're teachers and they're sort of like anti-business, anti-marketing, and they don't realize that what they're doing is trying to run a one-person business. So they're just like living these miserable lives because, they haven't figured out that they actually have to be the marketing and the advertising and the manager and everything.
Absolutely, and it's
And that it's,
exhausting. I mean, I do a lot of mentoring of. I particularly mentor women who are solopreneurs, and that's kind of, that growth piece from how do you go from being a solopreneur to that next stage if you want to. Um, and the big things I always get is, oh, it's not really about the money, is it? And I'm like, except like it is. Like, how many people go to their job and go, it's not about the money for me. I'm just here for the free vending machine. And so
oh yeah,
changing that,
the
and,
fruit
and
bowl.
that was very much me in the back in the day. I was almost embarrassed to make money from my business. It was I really had to work on that money mindset of becoming a business owner, and I found that extremely challenging. I feel like a bit like a smoker is never ever not a smoker. It's always there. I feel like that with my money mindset. It's always something that I have to work on. It's never kind of fixed. And I think those kinds of skills, in terms of marketing, business, finances, in your trajectory, knowing your conversion, knowing how to put yourself out there and feeling comfortable putting yourself out there and the visibility you need. I think those are all really hard pieces to learn.
Yeah. Um, I run like a Facebook group, and the people in the Facebook group are always, complaining about their wages. And they're talking about like, the convenio, and they're comparing the convenio. The convenio is the collective bargaining agreement. So for teachers, there's like an agreement between the labor unions and the business owners setting like a sort of minimum wage, and they're comparing that to the national minimum wage and talking about all of this. I'm like, my God, I'm so glad I'm not even thinking about the
I
minimum
know,
wage
and it's super
anymore.
frustrating. I mean, I have 40 staff, and three quarters of which are teachers in my Spanish school. And the convenio is like the all-encompassing all things. The problem is with education non reglada, which is like not school teachers in a public school. So you're not, a teacher in a school. Is they're lumped in. So English teachers, Spanish teachers, all of them, you're lumped in with lifeguards. So
Yeah,
an
you could be
18
like
year old
a
is a
clarinet teacher
lifeguard.
or like anything, right?
Anything, absolutely. Canteen staff. And it's just, so I just feel like there's a race for the bottom. It's like, what is the minimum? And rather than raising things up, it's always, and there's so many people in the collective bargaining that everything gets diluted, and it's such a long and painful process. And I just think I I, I love Spain's more socialist ideals. I love the fact that companies, we pay, in the UK recently, our social security contribution as an employer went from 13% to 15%. And people are like, it's the end of the world, companies are going to close down. And in Spain, for my company in Madrid, I paid 33%. And that's why we have such an amazing health service, why you can access it, why it's not falling on its knees. And I love that about Spain. But I also think it's,
On the other hand.
on the other hand, it doesn't support an entrepreneurial vision. It's not great for people who want to set up their own businesses. And secondly, with these collective convenios, it just doesn't raise up. It feels like it's always a race to the bottom.
Yeah, the race to the bottom is definitely something I have a lot to say about. I'm not sure if my audience is interested in that sort of topic. If you're watching this and you would like me to talk more about this kind of thing, please leave me a comment, and I'll talk more about it. But yeah, what my experience was that when I decided I was getting out of the race to the bottom, a lot of people who their whole identity was the race to the bottom just kind of disowned me. And
Yeah.
these are my friends and stuff, but they're just like the people with the socialist mindset that if the government isn't subsidizing me, I'm not doing it. And I was, an illegal immigrant. I didn't have the options to just wait around for the government to help me with things. So I was just, going out and making things happen. And this kind of offends people who come from the socialist mindset. This is a tangent that is probably not, probably best not to follow to its
We could. I
extreme.
think, I think that's a conversation with a glass of wine or two,
Yeah,
most definitely. But it is, it takes us back to what we were talking about. If you want to build a business here and you want to be a solopreneur, to be autonomo, as an English teacher, it's so hard because
or as
it's one of the
anything.
highest social security payments for to be a freelancer in the world, which is bonkers.
Do we
Which
have
is
data on this?
yes, I've written a blog about it. I'll find it, but yeah, it's one of the
Yeah.
most expensive in the world. And that's just not. And I know they've brought in some different things where it's graded,
Yeah,
but in
mine's
the
gone up.
yeah, so it's still not. It's the levels are still too low in comparison with where you compare them against salaries. So I think that's really, really hard. I think it's very hard to set up a business. I think it's very hard to run a business in Spain. Once you have to get past that threshold. So
Yeah.
that early stages, I think, is absolutely so challenging.
Yeah, the early stage is brutal. And the other brutal thing is just that there's so many people out there who have some idea, but they never pursue it because they can't start paying autonomo fees right away. I think
Exactly.
even now you've maybe got 6 months of lowered autonomo fees, but in theory you could be living with your parents and just have some idea and try to make something out of it. And if the government would stay out of people's way, we might have a whole different culture related to entrepreneurship. But
Absolutely.
instead, your mom's there like, what do you want to pay autonomo fees for? Just go be a funcionario.
But I get it. We've got a generation of grandparents and parents who remembered Franco, where there's no stability of money, a roof over your head, life, all of those things. So the
Unless you're a
dream,
funcionario.
exactly.
Yeah.
If you were a funcionario, that was literally the dream. It was stability, consistency, all the things that weren't available in that time. So I think the echoes of that is still so, we're not talking about, a couple of 100 years ago. We're talking about, a very short period of time. So I feel that those echoes of that and wanting the stability, the consistency, the don't make waves, do the thing, is part of what makes the culture the way it is when it looks at entrepreneurship. It's that's not the dream, and I think it will become the dream, and I'm seeing it all the time. I'm seeing You know, I talk to Spanish people at networking events, and there's definitely that new generation of fire coming through. That the functionario is not the dream.
Let me just define funcionario for people before we say it seven more times. We're talking about civil servants. They have to take a big long test, and you might study for this test for 3 years or something, maybe more.
Absolutely.
I don't know. But you end up with a job for life where you can't be fired. And this is kind of the Spanish dream where they want to, do their university, they want to take the test, and they want to get the job where they can never be fired because that way they have the stability and they're out of the regular job market, which honestly, the regular job market sucks.
Yeah.
So it's not a terrible trade-off, but having the regular job market and then the civil service as your two big options, it seems like having an entrepreneurial option that was more respected and, I don't know, less difficult to get started would definitely help the economy and help everybody in the end.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I do see glimmers of that change, most
Yeah.
definitely. And I really think the next, 10 years are going to be really interesting with that. And the government's going to have to come up with ways to, in the UK, for example, you don't either, for example, VAT, sales tax, isn't it, in the US?
Yeah, sales tax. It's a slightly different thing, I guess, but
So you don't have to be involved in that until you hit 80,000 of sales per annum.
yeah,
So it makes your just life easier
yeah,
because you don't have to have you don't have to have really an accountant because it's just so easy to file. Setting up a company, it takes you all of 20 minutes. It's probably why so many dodgy companies in the UK, but it's also incredibly easy to do. You go
yeah,
online, you submit your paperwork, and you're off and running, and you pay in accordance with what you earn. So, and it starts at a very low rate, so it does make it viable to have a business.
yeah. Oh, cultural differences. Moving on to another topic. We were talking in our previous conversation, like offline, about the glam gloss, about Instagram, and how people get like an idea about life in Spain from Instagram and other similar things that is maybe not realistic. And then they come and they are a bit disappointed. I actually met a girl last week who was talking about this very thing, that she's 22 and got started traveling because she saw traveling on Instagram and it looked like a lot of fun, and then the actual experience of travel and life abroad is often quite different than that,
It's
especially the
exactly.
life abroad bit where you're like looking for a flat and trying to pay your bills and all of this stuff is not glamorous and all of that. So could you talk a little bit maybe about the perception versus reality with life
I,
abroad?
I think it's a really new thing. Again, post kind of. I always think of life a little bit. Pre and post pandemic, and I think this zest for life, the digital nomad visas that have come up. This
Zest
kind
for
of
life shit.
this. But it is. It's like, oh, I need to get out there. I need to do my things. And you know, a holiday is one thing. Coming and, like you say, coming and living in a country that maybe you're not proficient at the language, you don't understand. Everyone's like, oh my god, the bureaucracy in Spain. I would say the bureaucracy anywhere in any
Probably.
country. If you come to the UK and you don't know the UK, it must feel like a minefield. So
The
I think that
language.
there's this kind of gloss put over life, coming to live, come and live in Madrid, come and live in Barcelona, and here's me, and on my way to work, look, the Sagrada Familia, and oh, look at me, eating my jamon, as my and I just think it can gloss over the reality because you're living, life is life, you've still got to get up, you've still got to empty your bins and work out the complex bin system, to put your trash out. You've still got to, like you say, hustle to find work and to find an apartment, which is, very difficult at the moment. There's just so many elements of it that I think are glossed over, and I think it really gives a false impression of life in a new city now, and so what we're finding is that people who are coming on our TEFL have expectations that they didn't necessarily have before, and I feel like they're hitting that reality in a much harsher way, whereas before there wasn't the same expectations of this sparkling life, and I think that's we're certainly noticing that.
Yeah. Like, I managed to get to Europe without really knowing much about it. And man, like Spain, I had no idea about Spain, and I just kind of moved here. And it's a longer story involving lots of layers of youthful stupidity.
As we all do.
But the glamour of Europe definitely existed because it sounded like it was going to be sort of sophisticated and cultural, and there was going to be nice architecture and stuff like that. But yeah, I didn't have a ton of information. Now I see some of these girls on Instagram who, they make these 30-second videos of a day in my life living abroad, where they're like doing, yoga in their bikini, and then they're snorkeling, and then they're at some rooftop bar in their bikini and running on the beach in their bikini. And I'm like shit, that does look fun.
It does look fun. Yeah, where do we
Why?
sign up?
And I'm actually living here, and I'm like, why does my life look like anything like this?
Yeah.
I'm,
You've got to
just
work, you've got to hustle, even if you're doing the digital nomad option, which is, quite a relatively easy visa to get in comparison with some other visas. It's a I think it can be a half life, it can be a transient life. You're not, with a digital nomad visa, you're not necessarily here for the long term, so it's hard to establish roots. You tend to be in a community of also people that you've met that are probably more transient. And so you've got this constant, whirligig of people coming in and out, so you don't feel as connected. I don't know, you kind of live more on the surface rather than living real life. And I think that can be problematic.
yeah. There's also just the fact that maybe the highlight reel is never really indicative of what goes on behind the scenes. Because probably if I were doing this, I could make a 30-second video of my day that looks pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I just never think of doing it. But yeah, if we edited out the parts where I'm like crouched over my computer, like updating keywords on some blog post from 11 years ago, and, you know, talking to my accountant, and, all of the regular stuff.
Life.
Life.
The
Yeah,
life.
isn't there that quote from John Lennon where he says that life is what happens while you're busy making other plans?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So,
So yeah, so I think I think it's important, with people who are thinking of coming here, remember that it's life, and there will be, just like there is at home. And I also think people, think that they don't pack all their things, like literally they pack their things, but they don't pack their things. And I think when you come abroad, you do. Any weird shit that you had there, you're bringing with you. You're just now in a foreign country feeling even more vulnerable with even less support. So plan for that. Plan for the fact that it is going to be hard, and there is going to be, and be, kind to yourself, but put in a support system and a reality check that there's going to be really hard days and lonely days as you go through that transition. It's part of the experience.
yeah, the I don't know. I just get most of my contact with, the newer migrants from Facebook groups, I guess. So I don't really know. But what I see on there is a lot of people have this idea that they're going to come to Spain, they're going to sleep a siesta, and like their whole life is going to change.
Yeah.
And that it's going to be kind of an extended vacation. and maybe in some cases that is more practical. Like if you're a baby boomer and you can sell your house in the US for $2 million and just come and retire in Spain,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, power to you, absolutely.
Yeah, that's not exactly my case, but I can see how that would possibly facilitate your extended vacation.
Yes, but that's not most people's experience or
Yeah,
reality.
definitely not mine or yours, and I used to think less about this topic, but the extended vacation crowd, it is important to note that on the other side of every extended vacation, there's like the day-to-day struggle of all the people who are working to make your extended vacation possible. The
Absolutely.
person bringing you pictures of sangria on the beach is living a
Absolutely.
different life, and ask them about life in Spain. They may give you a different
Perspective.
impression.
Absolutely. I agree. And that's part of, when you live Spain, when you're, and I do believe it's hard to fully integrate, but I think when you've integrated as a foreigner as much as you can in Spain and you understand, I understand that it's really hard when you're older in particular to make Spanish friends. And the reason it's hard to make Spanish friends is because the person you've met, so my friend Belen, for example, she's got 3 brothers and sisters, and her husband's got 7. So can you imagine the amount of christenings, confirmations, weddings, birthdays? So she never has a weekend, ever.
Yeah,
Plus, she is still round the corner from the people she went to school with when she was 5 years old, and she still knows them because
yeah,
they went to the same university in Madrid. They went to the Complutense, and they all live within the kind of barrio where they live, and it's really hard as a foreigner to integrate into that. So I can integrate into part of her life, but I can never fully be in her life, and I think that's a very typical thing. But having at least making that effort and having friends like that means I understand that. I
yeah,
understand that element of the culture that means it doesn't. I don't think Spanish people are unfriendly. I don't think that they don't want to meet for. I don't think that's the case at all. It's their lives are so full
yeah. They've
that
got
there's very little
Spanish
space.
lives that existed before you arrived and will continue existing after.
Absolutely. And they're full. They're really, really full. Whereas I'm there, little, me, without my family, without, in living a very, very different life. And so I think having, lived Spain, you understand that nuance rather than just, I often hear people saying, oh, Spanish people are not very friendly. And that's just not what, I don't feel that that's what it is. I
Yeah,
just, not a lot of room for you.
yeah, exactly. Probably this is going to be similar in other countries. Like I didn't hang out with a ton of
Yes.
immigrant type people when I was growing up in, Arizona.
Yeah.
Um, Potentially in other countries it's the same. You've got local people living their lives and then people from outside living in sort of a parallel society, within the same city. Often.
Absolutely.
Definitely happens. You talked about integration, and I was thinking about this because I wrote an article maybe 3 years ago about how to integrate into Spanish culture, and I was unable to come to any sort of conclusion about how to integrate besides like learning the language and then eating the food without complaining about it.
Yeah.
And
Um,
then as the nuclear option, you could sleep with the locals or marry a Spaniard.
a choice I wish I'd made. If I hadn't liked mine so much, I definitely would have made a swap seat earlier on. My friends who have married Spaniards definitely have a greater level of fluency and obviously get sucked up by this Spanish family. So now they don't have as much time because they're going into all the birthdays, the baptismals, and everything else.
Yeah.
So I
Just to be
definitely,
clear, your man from the beach in Abu Dhabi is British also?
very,
Okay.
very English.
Okay, okay.
as English as they come. So we, yeah, I mean, I think with the integration piece, the language is absolutely key. And something I really struggled with, as I say, I think part of it was a kind of mental block about learning languages. I just thought I just didn't have the ear for it.
A lot of
And so
people
I
think
really
that.
struggled. Sorry?
A lot of people think that,
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
they do.
but like education is just so shitty most of the time that, like, I remember in art class when we're 9 years old, the art teacher being like, "Here, we're gonna draw a circle. If you can draw a perfect circle freehand, you are a good artist, and if not, you're not."
Not, yeah.
I was like,
It's
okay, great. So at age 9, we've decided this, and
you're not an artist, off you go, thank you very much. Yeah,
yeah, go learn to be a plumber or something.
yeah, absolutely.
But people do this with language also all the time, where they get some, shitty Spanish teacher, and it just doesn't work out, and they spend the rest of their lives thinking, I am terrible at languages.
Absolutely. And I noticed that a lot less so with Americans and a lot more so with Brits, because I
Yeah.
think your education system has evolved with languages a lot more, and you get a lot more exposure to it. I know it's still not perfect, but I notice the difference in terms of the willingness to give it a go, as opposed to Brits. I think we're like another 5 levels down from that, where we're just like, we're just not going to do this. We speak English. It's just it's I don't know. It's a real issue for us
Yeah.
all the time. And I think that, again, that's changing a little bit, not a huge amount, because we just don't value second language learning in the UK. Coming to Wales has been quite interesting, because they're so, because of the Welsh language, and they're so, they protect the Welsh language. The dream is for your kids to grow up bilingually with both Welsh and English. And that's been really interesting to see. But there's no emphasis then on a third language, so there's still not European languages taught, and which I would never these days employ a monolingual staff member. If they've, obviously for the Spanish teachers, yes, but for any other role in my company, I would never employ a monolingual person. Why would I? There's just polyglots all over the place. Carmen, who used to work for me, spoke 8 languages.
8.
And
Oh, yeah.
it's just adding them on, because it was just part of the culture where she came from in Croatia to learn other languages.
Oh, yeah.
So I think learning the language is absolutely huge, and you've got to get over it, and you've got to get out there. And what I think one of the reasons, so pretty much all my businesses have been set up due to personal things that came up. So I did the TEFL course. I didn't like how the students were looked after. Set up TT Madrid with that in mind, that we had to deal with the whole 360. So we had to help with the visas, we had to help them with the jobs, we had to help them with the apartments, we had the whole piece, and be there for the whole time that they were there. We were the place you could come when things got difficult, that we were your home here. I set up the Spanish school, firstly because when we needed to change to visas, you remember the time things got serious and Americans started to need visas, and so we needed to work with a Spanish school. And English teachers are an absolute pain in the arse as students, because they're like, oh, why didn't you CCQ that? Why didn't you elicit that information? They clearly haven't planned their class for it. You're really really demanding. Yeah, because we see it the other side. We know what makes a good class. So when we receive a class, we're really critical. So I thought, right, just set up a Spanish school for my TEFLis, for my grads, where we train the Spanish teachers like we teach English, but in Spanish. So that came about that. My son went through a stage in his kind of bilingual road where he hit some bumps, and I needed a primary school Spanish teacher, and I couldn't find one. So I stole his teacher from his school, retrained her to be a Spanish teacher, and set up Like Kids. So my Spanish school for kids, because I thought, well, there must be other people like me who need this kind of support, and it's not out there. So for me, there's all these parts of your integration, your journey, making it easy, but not learning the language, for me, is the biggest missed opportunity you have. It's just frustrating to see, and you can't get on. You can't move and become a member of a society if you don't understand the language.
Yeah, well, this brings me to something that I've been doing. I have a YouTube channel where I teach Spanish. It's called Learn Spanish with Daniel.
Oh, fantastic!
It is sort of a work in progress, like everything else online, but I've got, I guess, between 50 and 100 videos where I'm teaching, Spanish.
Amazing.
So it's just something I enjoy doing. I've been teaching English online for so long that I'm kind of tired of it, but giving the same lesson but in Spanish is, more exciting to me. So if anybody wants to learn some Spanish, look at Learn Spanish with Daniel on YouTube. You can check that out. Recent videos have been about verbs, like I talked about the verb soñar and then the expression tengo sueño, but then there's me suena, which is kind of similar sounding verb, how to conjugate these things, the differences. I did
Amazing.
something about what did I do last week? Oh yeah, the verb poder, just how to conjugate poder and use things like that. Things you're going to be using all the
Useful.
time. Yeah, if you're living in a country. Because I also, learned Spanish in Arizona and I thought I would never actually have to speak Spanish. I just had to pass the test.
Yeah.
So when I'm teaching now, I try to give the cultural level also of, what real people say, why they might say it that way, if there's any sort of cultural information that people need to know, I give that also, and, helping people integrate through language.
It's such a key. This is such a key important area. I mean, we get a lot of people who, when they so if they come for one of our TEFL programs and they're from the States, for example, they'd come for a whole year program, which includes like Spanish, and they often put advanced
Well, advanced
on
means
their
something totally
list,
different out there. Yeah.
and then they come in pale and sweaty and go, oh my god, I don't understand anything. What happened? And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, let's reset, get into class. But I think the bit that makes a difference is getting out there and having a go. And I've never thought anyone was stupid or laughed at anyone having a go in English. So why would anybody laugh? I mean, obviously I've gone in and, I can remember ordering grape juice and I ordered 2 glasses of Monsters. And the guy at the bar just standing there and going, And I was like, wondering what the hell was
Oh,
going on with
monstro
this.
instead of like mosto?
Yeah.
Got it.
And so he just did it twice, and I'm looking at my friend, and she's like, I don't know. And then he leant over and he was like, that's Monsters, 2 glasses of Monsters. And I was like, oh, okay. So we all do the things, but in a nice way. But if you don't get out there and live the language, a language is not meant to be in a classroom. I always say, we're not creating language learners, we're creating language speakers. I want Spanish speakers, not Spanish learners. You've got to get out there and practice. You've got to get over that vergüenza, the embarrassment of it.
Yeah.
That's where you make the progress.
I wrote a whole book for English learners kind of about this topic. And in one of the chapters I talk about how, imagine you're teaching somebody how to play football. So you sit them in a classroom for 10 years and teach them football theory. And, you make them diagram like different plays on paper and all of this. And after 10 years, put them on a grass field and hand them a football.
Yeah.
What are they really going to do? Absolutely
Absolutely.
nothing. We don't teach football that way because that would be stupid. However, we do teach languages that way because, I don't know, that's just the way we've been doing it.
Yeah, I agree. You've got to live the language. You've got to get out there. You've got to take the risks with it. And you just see, for me, it was having my son and suddenly being integrated into the Spanish nursery school system and just going, what? And it was just overwhelmed. But my level just went boom.
Yeah.
It was just such a change for me. It was amazing.
So maybe for marketing, it would have been better to talk about this previously, but talking about integration and learning Spanish, you have a new project called BLC,
Yes.
BLC Spain. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
So it's not new as the concept, it's new with the name. probably for a conversation for another day on what the business is called before that. It was at a time in Spain where it was very complicated to name a business, and I ended up with a name that wasn't ideal after a very lengthy girls' lunch. So anyway, we finally decided to change the name of the business to BLC Spray with our brands underneath it. And so back when... So we've got 3 phases of people needing visas. The phase what you came in, where nobody really cared if you had a visa or didn't have a visa, if you were kind of from, you know, a country that they deemed acceptable, like America, etc., Australia, whatever. And then we went through the stage where things got a little bit tougher, but you could get a student visa, and it was super loosey-goosey to work, and everyone kind of paid under cash, and it was all that's that phase. Then we moved into stage 3, where it became much harder for people to work, and so we needed to come up with a solution where the people who came to study with us could work. And so we spent 6 years courting and working with a university, and then we became a satellite university for this university. So they're a university in Santander, and with satellite university for them in Madrid.
Is
And
it
so,
La WIM?
no, Europeo Atlántico.
Okay.
So they're a private university, very modern, very agile, and they were quite new when we got into bed with them. So they were like, sure, let's do some
Yeah.
stuff. So we were like, yay. And so we were able to build courses with them. And so the difference is when you come on a university student visa, you have the right to work for 30 hours because they're postgrad. And that's an automatic right to work. It's not that you have to request it, you can just work for 30 hours. And given that the full-time job in Spain is 39 and about to be 37, it's quite a good option. And so we've been working with this university, and one of my big frustrations when I'm employing Spain, again, a business that's born out of a hiccup in what's going on with me and my business, was that we were looking at grads who had business degrees or masters, MBAs, and just don't speak Spanish. And I don't understand how you can come and study a degree in Spain or a master's in Spain and leave and not speak Spanish. So I wanted to create programs, degrees and master's programs that incorporate both the Spanish and the business element of it. I'm also very, I like round peg square hole learning. I like the fact that I hate the fact that round peg square hole learning. So at the moment we bash everyone into the same box and get a load of squares, despite the fact that you want it to be a diamond or a triangle or anything else. So it's all very traditional learning at the moment.
Are you saying that you don't like the system where educational institutions will sort of treat everybody the same way when people
Exactly.
actually have very different needs and abilities?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So my son's perfect example. He's very articulate, very lovely, but he's got dyscalculia, and so he finds the kind of processes and systems. We just need to find other ways to bring out his abilities, and of which we can, except he has to pass his GCSEs for him to open the next door in life in the UK, so or in any other country. So I have to bash him into this, and it's so frustrating teaching him about lots of dead white men and business tactics that are just not a thing anymore. We can't use AI. It's very frustrating. So we, as well as building these programs to incorporate the Spanish element of it, we built the programs to really be flexible with the how. So you have to be able to show this, but how you show it can be flexible depending on the person who's coming. And so it took us a long time to design the programs and to get them approved by the university, because of course the university is still a university and going, can we use that? Can we use AI? And so we now have 3 degree programs and 3 masters. And as of 2026, we will also be offering British degrees in Spain.
Sounds good. So these are like full degree programs.
Yeah, 4-year degrees and 1 year or part-time, like masters over 2 years. So you can do them either way because it depends if people are working or not.
And so Spanish is also integrated into this, right?
Yeah, so they take 2 hours of Spanish every day, the whole time.
You make sure that people leave these programs with an adequate,
I mean, if you're doing a 4-year degree and you don't leave with like all but fluency,
yeah,
I would consider we have failed you.
right. And so this would help a lot of people to integrate. What kind of people are you finding are interested in this sort of thing?
I think there's a bias between who's coming at the moment because we're so good at marketing for the US. So we're getting a lot of people from the US, but I think that's slightly skewed by the fact that all our experience with the TEFL, with the Spanish, is skewed to that side. So we're attracting what we're already good at attracting.
Okay.
But on the course at the moment, we have people from Turkey, Ireland. We've got someone from Germany, starts in September. As I say, loads of Americans, one Australian. Yay, go Australia. UK, so we've got some people from the UK because it's around the same price, but you get to live in the sunshine, so
Yeah.
why not? And so, yeah, we're very, very into AI. I think a lot of the question at the moment from educational institutions is, how do we stop AI? And we've completely reversed that and gone, AI's here, they're all going to use it, let's encourage use of it and test in a completely different way.
Yeah, it seems like that's a big issue because what's the point of assigning somebody to write a 3-page essay anymore?
But you assign them a 3-page essay knowing it's going to be written with AI, and then what you do in the classroom is critique. What you do then is find a way for them to present the material in a completely different way. So
Yeah.
the assumption has to be, because the reality of the world is they will be using AI.
Yeah, I
So
mean, as an old person, I would be tempted to suggest that actually the process of writing the 3-page essay for yourself and thinking it through is the important part of that.
is it going to be though?
But like, well, I think humans thinking about things.
But we can get them to think about things in completely different ways. I
Okay.
think we just need to accept the reality of where we're at, and it also makes it super inclusive. So one of the things that we've really noticed that is a massive change in I'd say the last 4 years, is the amount of people we get on our courses who have ADHD, autism, etc. So that was just never an issue before. And it's not because people didn't have autism or ADHD. I think it's because the educational system didn't allow people to get through to then go on to university and therefore then have opportunities to come abroad and do study abroad and postgrad, etc. Whereas the education systems in, say, the UK, the US, other countries have now got support and people get learning plans, etc. So we've had to adapt and go, okay, so we're getting, we do a full assessment with people for our TEFL, for example. If they've got ADHD, we go on a call with them, okay, what have you got in place that's worked for you and what do we need to put in place before you come? And the same thing with the university. I think we're really good at helping, those round pegs who don't traditionally fit in a square hole. And AI, kids with dyslexia, AI is like a game changer. It's an absolute game changer. It gives you access to information and to be able to output stuff in a way that you've never been able to before. So we need to work with that, but still give you the critical thinking skills that you need in order to go into the workplace. And I think we can do that.
Well, sounds promising.
I hope so. It's exciting.
Sounds good. So this is BLC. Where can people find more about BLC Spain, and where can people find more about you?
So if you go on to theblcgroup.com, then all the brands are under there. And
blcgroup.com?
Yeah, theblcgroup.com.
Theblcgroup.com?
Yes,
With,
theblcgroup.com with
there,
the.
yeah, there it is. Theblcgroup.com.
Yeah.
All right.
You can see all the different educational ventures that we have under there, and anybody's welcome to connect with me, Natasha Kennedy, on LinkedIn. And if anyone has a small business and just needs a bit of a sounding board, I'm always there. I'm a massive advocate of helping people to grow their businesses, to earn money, and to make it a success in Spain. It's a real passion of mine.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for
And
having me. It's been fabulous. Really interesting talk.
yeah, thanks. See you another time.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That's all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed this new video format for the podcast. I've done a couple of these before. You could take a look at my episode with Seppi Tabibian about moving to Spain. That was interesting. Seppi also has a business where she helps people to start their new lives abroad. Kind of a big topic these days, moving abroad. Anyway, I am online as usual. You can check me out on expatmadrid.com. You could go to expatmadrid.com/donate and donate to the cause here. The podcast, of course, is free, and I don't really have much to sell you, but you could go to expatmadrid.com/donate and give a donation, anything from €3 on up to however much you want. You could go to YouTube and look for Learn Spanish with Daniel. I have about 50 to 100 videos there for Spanish learners where, like I said earlier, I also try to give some of the cultural information that people need to understand, what's really happening in conversations in Spanish. There's lots of layers, of course. It's not just donde está el baño. And there's plenty of other stuff you can find online. expatmadrid.com has a lot of articles about different aspects of Spain life, and I've also got other things up there. I occasionally travel elsewhere. I don't necessarily make podcasts about everything, but I was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, over the Christmas holiday, months ago now, but I finally finished the article about it. You can check my article about Kuala Lumpur out. I've got stuff about India, etc. Not necessarily worthy of a podcast called Spain to Go, but interesting nonetheless. Anyway, I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world, and see you soon.